Today it's my distinct pleasure to introduce our guest speaker. As America's Chairman of Strategic Communications at FTI Consulting, Ms. Elizabeth Saunders specializes in building investor relation programs across a wide spectrum of clients. She also serves as a senior counsel for business transformation assignments and has actively worked on post-merger communications and CEO transitions and restructuring of Fortune 500 companies to include AP Amoco, Coca-Cola, and the Dow Chemical. She's also been extensively involved in technology space with companies including Dell, Symantec, and Juniper. In addition to her role as chairman, she remains head of capital markets communications and the practice chair for the firm. Prior to her tenure at FTI, she co-founded Ashton Partners, a strategic advisory firm focused on financial communications. Ashton Partners was one of the country's top 15 independent investor relations firms before being acquired by FTI in 2007. Prior to founding Ashton Partners, she was the president and chief operating officer of the investor relations consulting arm of Thomson Financial Services. Earlier in her career, she served as an analyst for Inland Steel's pension fund and a senior analyst for Monticello's Investments, a Chicago area merchant banking firm. She also created and managed the Shareholder Services Division of the Financial Relations Board. Renowned for her expertise in the area of corporate governance, Ms. Saunders has published numerous articles and lectured throughout the U.S. on shareholder activism strategies and has been quoted in the Wall Street Journal, the New York Times, and Board and Directors magazine. She was named to Crain's 40 Under 40 list. She holds a law degree from DePaul University with a concentration in securities law and a BBA in finance from the University of Notre Dame. She is actively involved with Catholic Charities and the Cradle, and was on the board of directors of the National Investor Relations Institute and head of its Emerging Issues Committee and a member of its Senior Roundtable. Please give a warm welcome for Ms. Elizabeth Saunders.
I should give you all a hand for getting up this early on a Friday morning. I graduated from Notre Dame in 1989, and I can absolutely confirm with you that I would not have been in this room or anyone like it before, or I don't even think on a Friday, so I applaud you all. But I'm so happy to be here, and I appreciate you all coming, and I have 3 things I thought might be helpful to talk about, and if they're not, you should interrupt me and ask questions and direct me somewhere else. I want to tell you a little bit about FTI Consulting, which is the firm that I'm at. I want to tell you a little bit about my path to getting here, which was, I think, different and entrepreneurial and might be interesting to you. And maybe I'll share a little bit of my personal life, which is also different. And some of my personal life is in the back row right there. My mom, my dad, and my 3 girls are here. I have a son that thinks it's incredibly uncool to be with his mother, so he's not here. But I had an interesting path, and Notre Dame played a really big role in me taking that path, and I want to tell you about it if I can. And the third is I'm really excited about some work that my team is doing right now. I think it's game-changing, which might be me drinking our team's Kool-Aid, but it's on the role of what I think is very much the changing role of a CEO, and everybody in this room can and probably will be a CEO, and you should know this, and this is the first of many pieces that we're working on. But I'd like to end by not overly boring you on a topic, but giving you a topic I think is really, really interesting. At least it is to me. So I've given you my background, and I don't think the only point I want to make on this, and then I'll get my picture off the screen quickly, is I was a wild woman of Walsh through 1989. I love Notre Dame. I grew up in a great Notre Dame family. I am still such close friends with a few women from Walsh who have all done in their own way, really astounding things in business and law with their family and fundraising. Just people that sort of put me to shame every day with the work that they do. Some of it very, very quietly changing the world in their own way. But I will also make the point that I would have loved to come here for law school. I was soundly rejected because I think the cornerstone of my application, which was I was by far the most successful 4-year running social commissioner that Walsh Hall has ever seen, was not, while bringing us a booze cruise that is still talked about today, was not enough to get me into Notre Dame Law School. I want to start by telling you a little bit about FTI Consulting, and then I'll tell you a little bit about my path to get here. As I'm sure my dad and mom who are here today, who are nice enough to drive me up, will tell you, I don't have an awful lot of respect for authority. I really never had any interest in working for anyone, and I absolutely 100% would never have been a consultant. So when I graduated from Notre Dame, I knocked around a couple finance jobs, and I ended up deciding that I could start my own firm because, as my husband says, that when you're, I think I was 27, you know, you're 10,000 feet tall and bulletproof. There's nothing you can't do. Now, at the age of 44, I'm constantly second-guessing myself, but at 27, I was not. So I started a firm, which I'll tell you a little bit about later, that did investor relations work, which is really communications work for the C-suite of public companies. And the entire goal of that business was to help public companies really market and educate portfolio managers better about why to buy and sell stocks, especially their company. And at the time, because nobody else would hire us, we went with all small cap companies. I mean, today I work with such large and mega cap companies, and I was the initial cold caller at Ashton Partners calling these poor small cap CEOs saying, you know, I have a firm of 2, you should hire us. And so slowly as that business emerged, which I'll share with you quickly, and at the end of this, about 9 years into it, we were really in a wonderful sweet spot where I think CEOs were realizing that there was this huge gap between what their stock price fundamentally was worth and then what their stock price was selling at. And so many times it was lagging what the value of the company was on a discounted cash flow basis, right? And so maybe from their calculation, it should be a $28 stock, and it was a $5 stock or a $12 stock. And so they were willing to have a discussion about how better communications of financial strategy and financial performance might affect the investment community differently. And so that's where I think investor relations comes in. So if you go down the road about 10 years, a company called FTI Consulting, which I'll tell you a bit about, realized FTI works on, and you can see these really interesting headlines, and I'll tell you kind of some of the stuff we do for them, because I don't think, you wouldn't think that a group of 3,200 accountants could work on stuff this interesting, but they do. And what these guys realized is for every crisis they were doing forensic accounting work for, trial services for, and like down and dirty, restructuring management for, there was this massive communications component. So I'll give you a couple examples because these are really interesting stories to me. The top one is Transocean. And if anybody is as turned on by that news show as I am called Network, it's great. If you're not, get it. It's so wonderful. So they're opening, it's a story about a CNN-type newsroom, actually a Fox-type newsroom. And the entire first storyline is about what happened when the Gulf Coast oil spill occurred. And so what you all remember reading about and hearing about, and you still do today, is how BP ruined the Gulf Coast, and I think what they've paid so far to try and amend what they had done is maybe $23 billion, and they still haven't negotiated out with the U.S. government yet. So our client was actually Transocean, and it was Transocean's rig that unfortunately was the rig that happened in the oil spill, and it was unfortunately 11 of their contractors that died that were out on the rig at the moment. And the work that FTI did to me was so interesting. So it started off with a call from the head of communications at BP that said, listen, we don't need your help, but Transocean does. And so we put a staff of 10 or 12 just pure communicators down there just to deal with media inquiries and investment community inquiries because the stock had really gotten hurt. So there's a team of people that did that. We then brought in, immediately, of course, lawsuits flew. There's a whole lot of interesting analysis work that is still going on to figure out whose fault this was. And the answer is probably a little bit of everybody's, including Halliburton. So then we put a group of litigation, all lawyers, but basically litigation analysts, to try and figure out where Transocean's exposure was, to try and figure out what analysis needed to be done, what relationships needed to be done, and what we could say publicly about it, which unfortunately was very little. Then we put in our technology group, and our technology group has this really incredible e-discovery software where it essentially does discovery work, statistically reviewing everybody's emails. And so they looked for the past whatever number of years to understand the safety processes on these rigs and to figure out where there might be weaknesses that will ultimately come back to haunt Transocean. We've got lots of other people working on it. It's been a very lucrative piece of business for us. But that's a piece of business that FTI did that was led by my group, which is strategic communications, because the first call that we got was, we are getting 1,000 calls an hour. We don't even know how many people have died yet. You've got to come in and just help us mitigate the risks. And by the way, the U.S. government was the third call, so can someone help us with that? So it's kind of interesting where I think strategic communications led the way, which, by the way, when you start to look for jobs and you look for other consulting firms, we are the only firm that has the strategic communications segment, which I run in the Americas, which I love, and I'm going to PR to death with you all because I think it's such an incredibly important part of what we do. When you go to the more traditional firms, and I'm totally dating myself at this point because it probably isn't Andersen anymore, but when you look at Andersen, KPMG, Deloitte, you've got really brilliant people that do a lot of the work we do without a strategic communications segment. And when you look at Bain and McKinsey, what is the business that they're all building in the last 12 to 18 months? They're building a strategic communications segment because they realize that the smartest people in the world can do brilliant work, and if it's not communicated right to employees, investors, the government, or other stakeholders, it doesn't much matter. So that's my complete strategic communications bias that you'll hear all day today. The second piece, and I'll talk about this a little bit later, is the Madoff case, which you all know about, and the key points, that the work that we did here was very much forensic. It was our team of 50 guys that went in on the court, appointed us to figure out where the money was. And it's a very, very depressing case as you really got into where the money was and where the victims were. Stratcom came in, technology came in, because there was an incredible amount of e-discovery work that went on in the communications between Madoff and its clients and where the money might be. There's a legal side to it. You know, this was a very difficult case I'll talk a little bit about. The third thing I'll talk about here is the Coke piece, and I love this because this is my client and I've had an awesome time working on it. We got a call about 2 years ago from the CEO, and he said, remember that thing I've been telling the buy side and the sell side I'm never going to do? The company I said I was never, ever going to buy? We're going to buy them, and we're probably going to announce it in the next 3 weeks. Can you help us figure out how we tell people that story? And so that was Coke buying out its biggest North American bottlers, which was ultimately a brilliant move, but was not well accepted. And so that was kind of interesting because we led it with our strategic communications unit, and the rest of our units worked as well. But that one was kind of fun because the very first person that had to be convinced it made sense was Warren Buffett. And so it's very funny, I think, in our part of the world because you create kind of what you think is the most meaningful financial messaging. And part of what's always in your head is, I can convince this guy of that. But when your audience is Warren Buffett, you probably figure you can't really convince them of too much. So we went very straight with that one. So these are the kinds of things that we do at FTI. And the thing that I would say is there's a very deep accounting and litigation background that our people have. They're ex-investigators, they're ex-DOJ, they're all CPAs. One of our guys wrote a third of the Jobs Act, which I think hopefully will affect a lot of people in this room in a good way. So you have really, really smart people technically that are working on some of the biggest interesting things going on in the business world right now. And what I love about that is that each of these guys in their own way come to the conclusion, which is, I do really important stuff and it's not being recognized because I'm not able to communicate it. And I think that's where our unit comes in. This is the business as we've talked about it. It's about $1.6 billion. In this economic environment, it's not even remotely growing. We are going to celebrate like a 2% revenue growth year this year, and I mean celebrate. So it's a very difficult time to be in our business. These are our units. Our corporate finance and restructuring business does, when a company goes bankrupt, we will come in and either help them restructure it so they can come back as a going concern or liquidate the company. The strange part about this economic environment is it's not bad enough that everything's going bankrupt. There's restructuring going on and banks are renegotiating, but it's not good enough that this business is really slow. It's a very temperate business right now, and we expected a lot more bankruptcy, but in fact, banks are kind of willing to negotiate out a little bit differently. The FLC group, which is Forensic and Litigation Consulting,
These are just really interesting, really high-level investigative guys that when someone calls and says, I think we have employees stealing, and this actually happened, stealing maybe $100 million in our Asia business. Could you help us figure it out? They do in like 4 days. Really interesting group of people. Economic consulting, if you have it in you to be to get your master's or PhD in econ and get a law degree, this is the place for you, and also is a brilliantly growing business. They do 2 things. One, they look at economic disputes between major companies and try and help them assess what the damages behind the case are. And second of all, and this is really interesting, this business, and it's the biggest group of nerds you'll ever meet, but they're so incredibly interesting. They will look at large proposed acquisitions on each side and assess the antitrust implications. And so they're looking at deals we wouldn't even know would ever happen and won't contemplate that they'll happen because there's antitrust issues, and they're right in the middle of everything. Technology I've told you about, which is really a software business, which isn't particularly a great fit for us, and my strategic communications unit, which, as I've told you, I think is the most important unit, but it is the smallest. Our strategy in terms of expanding FTI, I'll tell you 2 things that I think are kind of interesting. And when you're interviewing with companies, you're going to hear this, I think. So many of these fast growth big companies that come here on campus to recruit and that you would really like to work at did the same thing FTI did, which is we grew through acquisitions. We did a lot of acquisitions, and we could do it, and the money was there. And that stopped a little bit for probably a bunch of reasons. But the reason that I see is that the companies that want to sell believe the economic environment is just going to turn the corner any second, and their valuations are really high. And we as a company think the market's distressed, and so we're not paying for those valuations. So you're not seeing a lot of acquisitions go through, and you'll see on the next slide how we grew through that. The second thing, and I think this is really interesting, and I'm sure my kids are fast asleep, but I do tell my kids this all the time. When I was at Notre Dame, it didn't cross my mind that I was going to work outside the United States. Maybe I had a myopic view, but it didn't cross my mind that I was ever going to work out of the United States. The path to finance was New York. There was no other path, truly. I don't know that I know anybody that worked outside the United States from Notre Dame unless they were doing volunteer work. You fast forward now, and it's very clear that a lot of the finance and consulting jobs are going to be in the emerging areas of Latin America and throughout Asia. My kids are constantly tormented that the only way they're going to get a dog is if they become fluent in Spanish. So they take Spanish, and my dad, to his credit, had us take Spanish when we were kids for many years, and my brothers, who are both one is a Notre Dame grad, both are incredibly successful. Their memories of Spanish was that the tutor wore her cheerleading uniform over, so they loved Spanish. I hope my kids get more out of that. I don't know if they will or not. But I would say in expanding globally, here's what I've learned at FTI. It is so costly to expand people and bodies in a services business that we're in that it is that it is going to be tough for us to make money building out this global footprint. But we have to, because 80% of our clients are building assets outside the United States. Far, far more than they're building assets inside the United States. And to me, when you have a $400 million company, which is very small in my world, opening up, 3 manufacturing facilities in Latin America when they're getting rid of people in the United States, that's kind of interesting. We should all know different languages, but more importantly, we should all be ready, except for my kids because I want them to live with me forever, but we should all be ready to live somewhere else. I spend an awful lot of my time building out our Latin America business, which is great and really interesting, and test my awful Spanish accent constantly. The only point I want to make here, because I think you guys, as you get further on in your finance studies or your banking studies or whatever you're going to do, you're going to always look at companies that have grown through acquisition. And we did, and you can see in 2006, that's when my firm was bought to add the 5th business segment at FTI. What's, to me, so interesting about this is that when we do it for 2012, you're not going to see one acquisition, and you're going to see flat growth. And so the debate that continues to go on among everybody, every academic and every finance person is buying a company that if you can't make it wildly accretive to your business and you can't do more things with it than the company itself was able to do, is it a good value, and do you ultimately get value for it? And I'll tell you that in my firm that was acquired, and I'm really proud of this because I was really lucky to be surrounded, and still to be surrounded by these very brilliant people. Of the 68 people when we sold the business into FTI, I think 60 of them are probably still there, and the top 15, other than one, are all not only there, but very senior positions. I can make, and I do make a case every day of the week that you have to pay a premium valuation for that type of company because it is so difficult to recruit great talent, and a smart acquisition in the service business allows you to do that. But if you buy 65 people and 40 leave after the earnout, you really did a dilutive acquisition. And I think in our business, it's very difficult to do. So you're going to see 2012 with probably 0 acquisitions and very flat growth. And if you really do the work, you're going to also see that a lot of the talent that we acquired in the last 10 years is gone. That's a big, very difficult issue that every company that does acquisitions kind of wrestles with. And we sure are wrestling with them as well. This is the consulting map that every consulting firm has. They just changed their logo on the side. I will tell you that when I first started Ashton, I didn't ever work with an office or a team outside the U.S., and I would say probably right now maybe 40% of what I do is, and I bet you that's echoed by most people. I'm going to tell you a little bit about my segment, which I think is a segment that people don't pay attention to because they put it under communications when in fact it's highly strategic. And if you don't believe me, go on to the McKinsey Quarterly from 3 quarters ago, and there's an awesome article in there talking about strategic communications and investor relations specifically, in which they essentially state that they have discovered it as a field and they're going to add it. Now, it's been around for 15 or 20 years. A lot of us have made a lot of money and enjoyed doing it, but McKinsey sort of decided after having 4 really smart people research it for 3 years that it's a real thing and we should start doing it. So we're happy to hear that. I'm going to give you a little bit of excitement about this segment. Now, I don't know if that worked, but that little piece of $12,000 is supposed to make you want to hire us. How did it work? Anybody? I'm going to tell you a little bit about the Stratcom segment. And as you're kind of thinking in your world, what do I want to do with the rest of my life? I'm going to tell you what got me into Stratcom. When 75% of it was random. and a really wonderful mentor who had really been the grandfather in the business, who I happened to get to know until he passed away last year. And it was a great mentor to me and sort of said, well, you should just do this. And so I was going to law school at the time at night, and I was thinking about working, and I was thinking about kind of going very pure financial analysis. And he said, you're not going to be happy with your nose in a spreadsheet. You can do that plus this. And that's kind of how I ended up in Stratcom with a really great guy. The power of, I think, communications, and this is from someone who doesn't use YouTube, could care less about Facebook. My kids tell me what a nerd I am, and I'm great with that. The power of communications is, to me, I think, astounding. I have seen, I was lucky or unlucky enough to work on a Michigan-based company that you all know, Dow Chemical, who went through an astoundingly volatile and unbelievable time. A stock went from $38 to $6. The company almost went bankrupt. Nobody would touch their bonds on the market. And I saw a CEO, Andrew Liveris, a chemist, by the way, not a sales guy. I saw him kind of single-handedly, with a little bit of help from us, convince Warren Buffett, convince his top shareholders, convince his employees, a third of which he was firing, and convince customers and stakeholders to hold on another 6 or 9 months because he had a really good business, and it was very unfortunate what happened. So I look at Stratcom as being the Band-Aid during that period, because I remember getting called in when the stock went from 36 to $6. They had contemplated, and they did, a really large acquisition, which kind of had 2 wrinkles to it. One, they committed to do it in cash for a fixed price, which is rarely done. And 2, the partner that they committed to do it with was a Saudi Arabian company, which they had a handshake deal with to supply a third of the cash. So overnight, when the market got bad, the Saudis pulled out, and we went back to the company to be acquired, Roman Haas, and said, I'm sorry, we can't do it. And Roman Haas said, no, you're going to do it. You may go into bankruptcy the day after you do it, but we have an airtight contract, and we did. We tried to go to the Delaware Chancery Court and get something done there that we couldn't. But I use it to say that Andrew is a very difficult guy to work with, as are an awful lot of CEOs. What he saw that I kind of, even at the time, didn't think he was right about was, I have the right business. This is a difficult time, and if I can keep everybody on the boat with me, I can turn this thing around. And he did. This is a guy who in October had gone to all his key shareholders and said, I will never cut this dividend, and then 3 months later said, I'm going to cut all but 10% of it. I mean, this is a guy who said to his employees, I will never fire any one of you, and had to fire a third of the U.S. workforce 3 months later. And the stories go on. But what he really saw is, this is unforeseen economic circumstances, unforeseen financial circumstances. We have a solid company that it is a real asset that the world needs, and he really believed it and believes it still. And if I can communicate often and effectively, then I'm going to build enough people around me to stay with me during the rough times. And the astounding part of this story is 80% of the investors that were in at 32 were in at 6 and are back in at 28. So, from the investor side, I think you really did that. So I like strategic communications because I think it does a couple things. One, you are in the boardroom, you are with the CEO, and you are giving really fair counsel on how the world is going to react to what, he or she has to say. And I think it's also very proactive. It's a wonderful part of the business that we do to be able to go to a CEO and go to a board and say, there's a couple problems we think you're going to have in 2013 that we know are looming with investors that you don't. Can we talk about them? That's a great business. That's not looking at 5-year accounting or financial performance and assessing historically trends. That's you sort of being a very thoughtful and sometimes lucky person in seeing trends. And that's a very powerful role, I think, to be in with a CEO as an advisor. And I think you either want to be a CEO because you want to work 180 hours a week, or you want to be an advisor to a CEO because you want to work 140 hours a week. Those are great places to be. If you want to be in business, you want to be there. Those are wonderfully interesting debates when you see really smart people trying to figure out how to maintain the value of the brand at Coke. I'll give you an example. My team at Coke worked on a really kind of wonderful and interesting project when the new CEO and chairman, Muhtar Kent, came in, where he said, we are doing so well right now. We are growing. Everybody knows Coke. We are making so much money. And I bet you by 2020, we have the potential to be a failed business. That was his opening remark. What he saw, which is so interesting, is that Coke at the time was not taking advantage of all the emerging countries and the emerging demographics, and he was trying to motivate his people to do that. So if you're looking for some fun this weekend, go onto the Coke website and see what came out of that meeting and some incredible research that was done and lots of thought-provoking discussions. See what came out of that, which was introduced in 2010, which was his 2020 vision. And when you look at that vision, you see a guy that was brought up in Turkey with a middle to low income family that changed the nature of Coke because he said, look at where the emerging demographics are coming. The Coke drinkers, I can't get guys in North America to drink any more Coke, and they don't really seem to want to buy my water. But I want, and he really believes this, everybody in the United States, everybody in the world should have 1.4 Coke products a day. And he's done, every bit of the math to show that the guy in Burma, in a small little hut, that he can somehow get Coke to this guy in Burma, and he's going to do it, and is doing it right now. That's wonderful vision, I think, that in strategic communication, you have a great opportunity to hear a CEO's vision, and then to help them kind of flesh it out and figure out the way investors and other stakeholders might want to hear about it. And so it's a great, it's not a very pencil-pushing kind of a business. It's a little bit of a think-on-your-feet kind of business. Our group does corporate, financial, public affairs work, and we're broken down by sector. And for our younger people that join, we really try and not put them in specific sectors, because what we find is you get bored and you leave us and we don't want you to. So as you move along in your career and you have real interest, especially in areas like real estate and technology and healthcare, you have to, and energy actually now, you have to have really specialized knowledge to be at the level we're at. But when you're in your 0 to 10 years, you really don't, and you shouldn't. And whatever sector, whatever you choose to go into, don't get pigeonholed into a sector. So we do very positive, happy things like help a company communicate a big new M&A, but we also do, awful things. We did the Transocean rig. We do bankruptcies. We do really difficult discussions about the weakness of a business, a CEO getting terminated, lots of things like that. But our perspective very much is, what is the investment community, who we think of as being a leading indicator, how are they going to respond to this news? And how can we get them to more rationally respond than they might? And so you guys are going to interview for jobs with the sell side, which is the guys who write research on public companies, and that kind of looks like a good job, and it could be. You're going to interview for jobs with the buy side. So those are working for a fund like Fidelity, where you get to make a decision, should I invest in Coke or not? There's a whole bunch of advisory pieces that go around that, and those would be in finance positions. Those are kind of interesting because it's my team that is trying to convince that team to be rational in how they respond to corporate news, or to make sure they have the information they need to evaluate that news properly. That's a great connection, and either of those jobs I think are really interesting for what we do. We win a lot of awards, as well we should. We've got some of most of our senior people have every reason to be at a senior level and operationally at a business or at an investment bank, and they have done that, and they're kind of bored. And the wonderful thing about any firm you join, but I think what I've always looked at as being a great thing with FTI is there are firms that are very rigid in their structure. You may be a kind of person that really needs that rigidity. There are firms that are very entrepreneurial, and because FTI was essentially put together by 200 firms just like mine, you have 300 entrepreneurs who do whatever they want, whenever they want, and your only job as their manager is to sort of essentially funnel them around basically your strategic plan, which they probably helped you create, so they're doing anyways. So we win awards, I think, because we do two things. One, we have the most diverse teams out there. At a deal team will be a newly minted Harvard MBA, as hard as I try to keep Harvard out and Notre Dame in, that's a fight. It'll be a guy who ran a telco company as a CFO. It'll be an ex-investment banker and an ex-sell-side guy, and then someone who's only done public relations their entire life. And it's a very diverse group. So you put those people together and you get some really good thinking, which is how we've won a lot of these awards. These are great big old clients that we work with that we've worked with for years, that we do an awful lot for. This is kind of the way we think about when I'm talking to a CEO and he's saying, why would I hire you? I think we have a great financial background. And these are things you got to look at when you're thinking about what you want to do in your career. Financial is broad and interesting, and it doesn't just have to be, deep accounting. It doesn't just have to be international monetary system. Finance to me, and I don't think I took, I'm sure my parents will tell you that I did not remotely take advantage of that portion of my education here, because I was too seriously contemplating my social commissioner role. But that, finance is to me, what is so interesting right now is when I was here, it was a very US-dominated finance market. You could sort of track capital flows in and out by, essentially looking at what was going on a lot in the US. Asia was emerging. It's not remotely true. We have a whole group of people that all day, every day, and it's so interesting to me. They do real-time tracking on capital, where the most money is being raised for what type of company and when. And they essentially may tell Dow Chemical, this week you should do it in New York, and 12 weeks later you should do it in Brazil. That's how much the capital flows are changing. And that's why I love finance, because I think there's so much international finance work for us to all to understand the inner workings of all of our different economies, which clearly are pretty tied together. These are, I want to talk a little bit about you and talk a little bit about the career path and development side. I don't think I could have been a worse interview at Notre Dame. I don't know how I got a job. And I did. I got plenty of job offers, and the only thing I can think of is they were desperate for finance and women at the time. And I had somehow sweet-talked my way into the greatest job in the world, which was a summer internship with General Mills. And it was at the very tail end of when they were really overhyping these internships. They took us on private planes. They put us up in these great places. It was a wonderful job. And the guy, unfortunately, until he passed away 2 years ago, who interviewed me, I kind of remember him looking at me during the interview, and we had a great, just funny interview, and him sort of questioning some of my grades. And I didn't even lie. I couldn't make up why my grades at that level were so bad in finance. So I didn't. I told him what I really was doing, and then we just talked a little bit about finance and marketing, and I got lucky enough to do that. But I'll tell you that. I interview 15 people a week, and I usually have to be, I'm so sick of it, and it's such a difficult thing. So remember when you're interviewing for these positions that your resume is like a blink of an eye to those of us interviewing you. I know that sounds horrible because I know you spend 80 hours perfecting it. We don't look at it that closely. Pick the 2 things on your resume that you think really matter. Whether I think they really matter, I don't think that's not the issue. That you are really passionate about, and no matter what, make sure that you talk to me about that. You may be dead wrong. I may not care about the 2 things you pointed out, but your enthusiasm might make me interested, which will help me push you along. The toughest interviews that we have are people that cannot relate what they've done to what you do. So I've had people with 30 years of experience, far more brilliant than me, come and interview for a senior job at FTI without looking at our website. Look at the company website, figure out what's interesting to you, say, I did this, or I'm really interested in doing this, or I just read this article on this. How does it relate? Your question might be completely wrong because you don't understand it. Who cares? The point is that you're beginning a discussion with me, which allows me to figure out, are you smart? Are you creative? Do I want you on my team? And especially for consulting firms, I know it's a different story with other type of firms, so especially with consulting firms, I have been with the same 12 people for 15 years. The same guys I called when I started Ashton are the same guys I called on the way here this morning. And so you really end up in consulting working with teams. And so one of the first things that you think about in a team is, could I have a conversation with this person at 11 o'clock at night? Do I care to? So make sure, one, that you understand what the business is. I don't care if you're interested in the business or not. You better walk in and tell me that you're interested. And 2, let your actual personality show. If you have an acerbic sense of humor, it's okay. You should show it. Or if you're serious or you have a passion that I don't know anything about. You have to be human because we interview so many people, and You know, this is a market where we're just interviewing an awful lot of people, and the candidates are really kind of brilliant. And so part of it is just a team nature of, could we connect with you? And if it's Notre Dame or tennis or whatever that's interesting to you, connect with us. I mean, self-starter, willingness to travel, all this stuff. I mean, I think when we actually hire people, we hire people with the technical skills, and then we hire people that we think our clients would like and we would like. And so we assume if you got to someone my level that you have the technical skills, and I'm making an assessment of if I want to work with you and I think my client would want to work with you. So keep that in mind, because you read the job description and people go very technical in how they're interviewing. By the time you're at your final interviews, we're not technical anymore. We haven't looked at your resume. We don't know. We're now going with fit and what we see as entrepreneurial or self-starter or whatever cultural fit we're looking at. But technically, your first interview gets you across that technically you could do the job. After that, it's different. I think firms like ours, and I think consulting firms in general, but not pure accounting firms, are kind of interesting for people right out of school or out of MBA school, because you really are thrown into teams. You have a client issue and you're thrown into a team. Now, you're the guy on the team building the spreadsheet while we run out at 6 o'clock and say we're going to go watch our kids' baseball game, and you build the sheet and send it to us later. But there is not a rote job that you do. So if you're someone that's really kind of rigid and you like to know what you're going to be doing from week to week, consulting is an awful place for you. If you're someone who gets bored easily, which I happen to be one of those people, consulting is kind of an interesting place to be, because you can work on different projects, but the further you get along and the better you are at your job, the more you can say, I don't want to do this, I'd rather do this. And I think that's great, because I look at even really, really successful people that run their own companies, and I don't think sometimes they have as many choices as I have for I don't want to work on that project, or I don't want to work with that guy. So I think that's interesting. The client exposure part of this, it doesn't matter what you want to do in your life. The thing that I've learned, or I've watched really successful people, there's probably two types of people. One type is so incredibly brilliant, and I unfortunately have 2 brothers like this. I did not get those genes. They're so incredibly brilliant that whatever they choose to do, they're going to be the most successful at it globally, because their brains are so big on this subject and they're incredibly hard workers. There are people like that. I am not that person. The second type, I think, is someone who can create cultural fits with people really well, and someone who can sell and be a leader. And so the guy who's really brilliant trading doesn't really have to be a leader. He can sit, I mean, as has been proven by many, in front of a screen by himself for 8 hours a day and become a billionaire. You can do it. I couldn't. Many of you can, some of you cannot. So I think the second part is the cultural fit and just getting very comfortable with people and giving them confidence that you can lead them in some way. My kids are sick of hearing this, but I think in the end, everybody's looking for a leader. And so what I love about Notre Dame is I remember graduating with like what had to be the steepest drop in GPA from first semester freshman year to last semester. I mean, I'm sure I'm still talked about me in the school. But I remember even with that, feeling like starting my first job thinking, I am so going to lead this place. Just being sure of it, because I think Notre Dame itself is filled with, they recruit leaders. I think the academicians here are leaders, but I also think you feel great that you have a faith life, which is kind of big, a cultural life, which is kind of big. There's such a wonderful feeling about Notre Dame that you kind of start your day and your life thinking, I'm going to be in charge. And I think if you continue to think you're going to be in charge, you are. I'm such living proof of that. And I know plenty of smarter people that are also living proof of that. My middle brother, who is brilliant, absolutely unequivocally brilliant, but didn't apply himself very hard at Marquette either, loves to quote that most Fortune 500 CEOs were C students and are under 6 feet tall. So if you're either of those, things are looking extremely good for you. But I think one of the ways that you become knowledgeable about how to be a cultural fit with people and how to be a leader is client exposure. My mentor in this business, and so many people that do what I do far better than I do it, we all had a mentor that forced us into presenting to a client. forced us into presenting to our colleagues, sort of put you in a situation far before you should have been in the situation. And so I love the idea of consulting. And the question I would ask as you're talking to these firms or you're thinking about this business is, A, do I want to be that person? Do I want to be the one in the meeting saying, stop, this is not a good discussion to have, let's have this one instead? Do I have that in me and do I want to do it? And the second of all, can I join a firm that will let me do that at younger ages? I remember being 24 or 25 and I was going to law school at night and I was working during the day and I was clearly not remotely ready to be counseling actually on the subject of shareholder activism, which I still counsel on today. I worked with a company who fought off Carl Icahn successfully. So I remember a mentor of mine saying, you're going to talk to him about the 3 concerns about shareholder activism. I said, I don't even know what this is. He said, well, you've got till tomorrow. So I didn't study in law school. You'll see this pattern. And I don't think I went to classes that night. And the next morning, I came in ready. So one of the things I would definitely ask yourself, if you like that and you want to be that kind of person, you better make sure that your first job or your internship, you get these opportunities to do it. Because I think so many times we're amazed that our junior people leave us for a better opportunity. And when we look back, we realize we didn't give them much of an opportunity with the client. We told them to go do a bunch of Excel spreadsheets and make sure the PowerPoint looked good. And we bought them coffee, but we didn't say, okay, I'm going to let you start the presentation with your analysis on, X, Y, Z. And during that time, as a senior person in the room who's thinking, this guy just paid us a huge amount of money for this research, you're thinking, oh my gosh, is she going to screw up? People don't screw up. So, but my favorite junior people are the people who say, hey, I did that research. I want to talk about it. Could I talk about those slides? Or I created slides for you. I'd really like to talk about them. I mean, there's wonderful responsibility that goes along with doing that. And there's a wonderful feeling as a senior manager that you think, yeah, I'm going to do this. I'll take this risk. So my ultimate message on not just FTI, but any of these firms is career path at any level seems to be such a big discussion. I have it with 50-year-olds. I have it with 22-year-olds. Companies do a really crappy job of helping people understand career path. And I think the most successful people that I work with today, every 3 months, are talking career path. What do I want to do next? What's my next opportunity? So that's a question I would ask in an interview, in as polite as a way as you could, which is, if I did this for a couple years, help me work through all the different places I could go. It's not a rude question. You should ask it. We won't think about it. I've talked about a lot of these things. The most interesting piece of FTI and what keeps me around, I sold my business. I have little kids who I don't know if they want to be around me more or not. You have to ask them after this. But one of the things that keeps me around is when I can sit and talk about a potential IPO with a guy who drafted the Jobs Act. That's very interesting. And so wherever you go, what I love about consulting firms, which is probably some of the things corporates hate about consulting firms, is you have really brilliant people. You have people that came up with rules and laws and plans and worked on. We have 2 of the partners that were part of the big split with Accenture way back when. I was actually at an executive forum at UVA Darden, which is like 1/10 Notre Dame, and we have a nicer campus. But we had a wonderful, storied professor talking about Accenture, and we had 2 guys put up their hands and go, I was at the meeting you just talked about. You're not right. Here's what actually happened. So I mean, it's wonderful, I think, to be at a firm where you can have people with varied levels of expertise and lots of knowledge. And there's nothing better than a younger person going in and saying, can you tell me the story of that, or can you tell me your perspective on it? These guys love to talk, but they also give you a perspective on what you're working on. I'm going to talk a little bit, and then I'm going to shut up because I can actually see my kids fast asleep up there. The exact quote was, why do we have to go hear Mom speak? We hear her talk all the time. And by the way, for anyone who's pondering having a family, when I was here, I never pondered having a family. I had absolutely no interest in it. It is the single most humbling. It's the greatest thing in the universe ever. It is so incredibly humbling. I love being a working mom, which most people don't tell you, because my house with 4 kids and grandparents and madness I get 0 respect, and it's a hovel, even though it's a nice house. You go into your office, someone's bringing you a cup of coffee, it's very quiet, everyone's being very deferential. No one talks about them, because it is very difficult being a working mom, and that's for a whole other discussion, but no one talks about that part of it. So let me end with something that's really near and dear to my heart and really interesting. And I think it matters because if you're going to go work either in an advisory role or for a company that's public, which I'm going to believe 70% of you are going to do, the role of the CEO is totally important and powerful, and it's changed massively. And so a group of people far smarter than me that I work with, this is true over beers, we're talking about what were the implications of how CEOs who used to have their jobs for like 18 years, and now I believe that, I think it's 4 years or something that the average CEO is employed. And every headline you read is about a CEO moving on. I literally got one from a client this morning, and I probably get 2 a week, which I think is a pretty high velocity. So one of the questions that our guys had were, doesn't this change kind of the dynamic? If you know you only have 4 years in that job, you're probably going to do things a lot differently than if you had 18 years. And so we started thinking of, okay, if you're a new CEO right now, what are you thinking of and what worries you and what can we talk to you about? And so we decided that the role of the CEO as a communicator was totally important because if your employees didn't like you, there's proof you get kicked out soon. Your investors don't like you, you get kicked out very soon. And there's probably other pieces there too. So we said, well, we think in 4 years you can't make all the operational changes that you want to make. It's not physically possible. You own Dow, you've got, 12,000 employees in 80 countries. How could you possibly make all the changes that you want to make? So we thought, hey, communications, which is a function we really believe in, matters. And so we are looking, and this is part 1, and we're at part 3, but I'm just going to share with you part 1 because you'll all go to sleep and leave. But part 1, the first thing we looked at is we looked at stock price movements during CEO transition periods, and they were all over the board. And then we looked at all these wonderful Wall Street Journal and New York Times articles about CEO transitions, and they seemed to want to say that when a new CEO came, that stocks went up or down depending on the reputation of the CEO, and that was as simple and straight line as that. And we didn't really think that was true. So we thought if a new CEO comes into a very serious position, we have a lot to say to him or her on what stakeholders think and how they assess you during the first 6 months. And we thought if we could do this and do the analysis, and I'll quickly go through it, we have a wonderful platform to go to a CEO with and say, we got a great idea for the way you should communicate for the first 6 months. You should hire us, and you're going to be so happy to have paid us all that money. So there's a couple things on we look at the market as the buy side and its influencers. So the buy side are fund managers, which are global today. The sell side are the guys who write on a company. So if you want to pull up, there's 8,000 research reports written by avid sell-siders on Coke, and those guys write. And then there's media influencers, which for purposes of this, we looked at as just the financial media. And this was kind of our major takeaways. Market sets the tone for CEO transitions by granting permission or providing scrutiny. And they do set the tone. And you can read this in sell-side reports, what they expect. The best example is Meg Whitman, right, taking over HP. The tone was astoundingly positive, and the stock went up, and they've lost complete and utter faith in her in 6 months, but I think she's going to do just fine. Influence on the market in changing corporate behavior continues to grow with no recession in sight. There is a buy-side, literally a 26-year-old buy-side manager at Fidelity who holds a small-cap company, holds a very large position in a small-cap company. A new CEO comes in, he decides or she decides for whatever reason she doesn't like him, he will bring a stock down from 17 to 11 in 72 hours. That's amazing power. And probably not right, but realistically true. So this is kind of the turnover stat, and you can see how big it is. And we did it across the world because we thought it might be different. And of course, in Europe, they get their jobs longer, just like their vacations are longer. But it's not particularly different. So it's about a third turnover. You should expect to keep your job about 3.5 years, which is just really astounding. And we thought there might be a big difference in stock price change during that period if it was planned or unplanned, which it clearly is. So under plan, this was more than 50%. And then we had some great special situations, which our forensics guys come in and help you take care of. So that's about where it is. And this is kind of where the stats lie. So if it was a planned retirement, when a CEO leaves during this period of time, There is average stock goes up is 5, average stock goes down is 4. If it's a resignation, and I find this really interesting, there isn't that much of a difference. So isn't this interesting? You could have a planned retirement of a guy that was taking the job, everybody knew he was taking the job for 3 years. There's almost no change really in stock price between that and a surprise resignation. The only time where you really see big movements in stock price are in the special situations, which tend to be pretty negative. So what I just showed you was day of. And I guarantee you, any article that you go back and read day of a CEO, you are going to see some really deep commentary from some financial media guy that knows absolutely nothing on why the stock price moved by 2.5%, whether that means something or not. This is what we think matters. And if you now look in the Wall Street Journal and New York Times and you look up this subject, you're going to see our research on it because we've been published all over the world on this research. And I just turned it off. Okay. We haven't published all over the world in this research. I would say my mother, but I don't think she read it. Only me and my mother read it, but it was in all the major journals. So let me tell you what matters. Instead of looking at day of, we then looked at 6 months, because what we knew we could say to a CEO is, you can control this. If there was no difference between how stock price moved on day 1 of a new CEO announcement and at month 6, no need for communications. We don't have anything to sell. There's a huge difference, right? So whereas we saw -4 to +4 is kind of where stock price moved at day 1, this is where it moved after 6 months. I mean, look at this. This is the easiest conversation to have with the board, if they believe the data, which they sure as heck should. Succession or retirement, 18.8% is the average a stock price moves positively down -13. Resignation, 18 down -20, special situation, which could be a CEO getting arrested, which has happened to me before, 28.4 to 20.2%. Forget about the numbers, except when you're bored and want to look at these closer. This is what this says. At day 0, the market perceives a CEO transition, a new guy coming in. They don't really care that much. Within the first 6 months, they care an incredible amount. You hold a stock and it's $100, you get a new guy in, and 6 months later, no fundamentals has changed, and now it's 80. You care about this. So I love this, because I think what this is saying is the market, financial media, MSNBC, you hear them talk about new CEO and the stock's down 1.4%. What does that really mean? This is the work that they should be doing. These are the stories that they should be covering, because what we're hearing is that at month 6, shareholders and influencers have stepped in and they've made very, very, very serious decisions. When a good company drops 20%, this has all been corrected for the market. This has nothing to do with the market. This is single stock. I mean, this is, to me, pretty amazing stuff. And so this, in my own little world, tells me communications matter an awful lot, because the average CEO doesn't step in and make massive changes in a business in 6 months. You can't. You're too global and it's too difficult. So much of the first 6 months is me as a new CEO telling you, as a customer, a supplier, an investor, an employee, hey, this is what I'm going to do with the company. This is what I see. This is the wonderful benefits that we have in the company. This is where we've screwed up. This is, to me, all communications at 6 months. How many new CEOs come in and do a massive acquisition in the first 6 months? No way. Never happens. To me, this is all communications. This is really great stuff. And to me, so I'm saying to me because I'm wildly biased, okay? But I will say that McKinsey is now using this report, and our name is in very, very small type, but it's in there, which I'll hand it to them because to make the same case, which is when a CEO transitions into a new big job, one of the things Meg Whitman decided not to do, and we had a shot to pitch her, and I can tell you that I got soundly and utterly rejected, which is about 50% of my job right now. She felt we showed her these numbers. We showed her team these numbers. She felt communicating wasn't going to get her anywhere. So you should ask. She would probably stand by, and she's probably going to be a multi-gazillionaire next year and doesn't need me, but she wasn't right on this particular area. These are all the different company-related circumstances of why people move, and I should show you because I think what these show is the higher risk, the greater surprise, the more short-term upheaval there is in stock price. But as you get to 6 months, this is amazing to me. You could have a planned retirement, and it could be almost as risky as finding out your CEO was in the middle of a fraud ring. Not at day 1, but at month 6. The other piece I want to talk about, and this is a great interview fodder. This is just good, interesting stuff. I mean, the best thing you could do at interviewing with FTI is go online and read this and then quote the study. I'm sure we'd make you an offer immediately. Somebody actually once quoted someone else's study, which they did not get an offer. But I should applaud them. This is one piece, and I think this matters. Communications and investor relations has been really perceived to be under the public relations realm. It's not. It's a financial and strategic piece. A third of investors we spoke with say 30% of how we assess whether we're going to buy or sell a stock is off their perception of the CEO. So you could be an uber perfect operator and you'll get an A+, but if you're not, in a tough economic environment, perception is how you communicate, what you communicate, how much you can convince people that the plan that you've put together makes sense. A lot of it is communication. The other piece is investors are 2.6 times more likely to sell or buy because based on a CEO. So these two facts together basically tell you, and boards are really interested in this topic, right? They really tell you that the assessment of the CEO as really running and driving the company and driving valuation of the company is key. I've been working in the field for a long time. I don't know that I think that that's true, but I do think the investors think that that's true. That's a great little visual. The only other piece that might be kind of interesting to you as you think about what you want to do in your life is you have investors in the middle, which is the piggy bank. That's pretty creative, right? So those are the buy-side guys that we talked about, that when I was at Notre Dame, this is the only job people wanted. They wanted to go buy-side. They were going to make the most money. That kind of slowly transitioned as they wanted to go buy-side, but they wanted to work for hedge funds. I don't know whether I think those jobs are great anymore, but they sure make money, and they're sure who my life has been focused on. So investors are telling us CEO reputation, what I think of them matters. So then we said to them, well, you meet them twice a year and you get your perception that way. Who else influences your perception? So here's cool ways to work within the investment community. Financial media is 27%. And by the way, reporters hate this stat. Reporters think it's much, much higher. I was lucky enough to sit next to Maria Bartiromo at a breakfast, who could not be a prettier or nicer or skinnier woman, for anybody who's always wondered that. She was so offended by this 27% number. To her credit, she said, send me all the data, and we did, and I never heard from her again. So I think she thinks the data was right, and she's upset by it. Sell-side analysts, so they're the guys that write the research. You'll interview for those jobs. And these are kind of interesting, too. Customers, former colleagues, other CEOs, and industry analysts. What I think is interesting about this is your circle of your own reputation in your life, because you're going to be CEOs of whatever you want to be. Your former colleague from your first job still somehow is opining about you, which I've learned off Facebook. Other CEOs, industry analysts. In this very connected world, reputation matters, because investors say it matters an awful lot to stock price. And these are all the groups that affect a CEO reputation. From my strategic vantage point, what my team does is say, okay, how are we going to convince all those people? We have a new CEO coming in. How are we going to influence all those people to say what we think that they should say in the first 6 months of a CEO-ship? So I think I have I'm probably over allotted on my CEO time, but let me tell you that if you're interested in that topic, the next work that was done is on our website. It's so interesting. It's on the CEO's role as a statesman. So about 5 years ago, we did this research with, where we asked portfolio managers, do you care if your CEO is in Washington or Brussels? Do you care if he's trying to influence policy? Is that good or bad to you? 99% of them said, we could care less. He should stay home and stick to his knitting. And I was really depressed because I really thought I was onto something, and that the portfolio managers would think I was onto something and say, yes, it's really important. It would be a new piece of business for us. I was completely and utterly rejected. So here's what's interesting. A young guy on my team reinvigorated that study 6 months ago. Guess what? The number was 70-30. 70% of investors now see Washington as so volatile and so dangerous that CEOs should be playing a major role in their shaping policy, whether it's healthcare, tax policy, environmental. So if you are so inclined, the next piece of research that's out on that is called CEO as a Statesman. It's to me, incredibly interesting. And the takeaway from that research has been that the role of the CEO has changed so massively and now suddenly needs to become to have play a role regulatorily across almost every industry. So I am open for questions. I'm also open for you all to run off to lunch and my kids to just crawl under their seats saying, "Why won't Mom shut up?" Anyone have questions or thoughts?
No questions?
That's a good, I think that's a really interesting place to be. All those guys are CPAs, and all the, there are, and you're welcome to email me and I'll give you all the names, there are probably 12 firms that do it, and my understanding is you would either go accounting path like our firm, or you would go to a firm like Kroll, of which there's 10 or 12 of those as well, and it's very interesting. Their business is all security. And so Kroll started off as like the Kroll security guy at your front door, and then they, over the last 10 years, have added a service where they use their accountants as investigators to go, let's say we have a new board member, which we do, from Brazil. We hired an external forensic guy with an accounting background, investigative background, to tell us, you know, what awful things might be in his background. And I'll tell you the other thing I worked on with that group is I worked on a kind of a strange situation where a mine half owned by the Chilean government and half owned by my client, they were in a massive dispute, and our forensic accountants basically went and lived in the area where the mine is in Chile for 3 months and spent 3 months trying to investigate how employees were being treated, environmental problems, labor problems. So it's not an accountant type job. It sounds like it is, but forensic is not an accountant type job. I think you have to have the technical skills, but then I think the work that you can do is totally interesting. We have a new group of almost 50 guys in Asia who do only that because nobody wants to do business in Asia because they're so dangerous. They think the rule of law doesn't exist. So send me an email. I'll send you all the firms I have, but I think it's kind of an interesting, it's not a pure accountant field. It's a cool thing to do with an accounting degree, I think. Any other questions? Well, sorry. Mm-hmm. We probably have, it's a good question. I think anybody who's gone far enough in their career that they've done business operating or business communications is probably, will get hired. But I think in our areas, it's really only technology and Stratcom that wouldn't hire an accounting. But you look at the other consulting firms and, you know, they probably hire more broadly in liberal arts than we do. And we've got some really great, brilliant people who run the firm that were liberal arts guys who are working on changing our recruiting to be broader. Because if we can if you're a history major and you're really smart and you're wonderfully personable, we'll teach you technically what you need to do. You've got the core skills. But that's a transition going on in the world right now. Because we used to hire technically, and now we're so much more thoughtful on how we're hiring. And so there are firms out there that do personality tests. There's all these different things going on, but we're all going for the same nugget, which is just because you're technically adept, does that mean you could actually do the client and the cultural job? I would talk a good personality, a high GPA, and a good story is going to get you hired anywhere. That's just, no matter how bad the market is, my favorite hire who by far has been a massive, massive contributor to my success was a liberal arts major from a small college who I did a favor hiring because I knew her dad. And 15 years later, she's got a phenomenal career, but she's also, because she's such a great writer and speaker, she can do anything. She's worked on the most complex deals. So find a major that you like, not a major that will make us hire you, because a year after you get hired, it doesn't much matter anyways.
This is kind of completely different, but how do you manage to have such an amazing family life and such an illustrious career, especially with all the traffic going on in consulting?
It's a huge, It's a great question, and one I wrestle with every day. I know how I do it, and this is like the only nice thing I'm going to say about my parents. I have never had bigger fans in the universe than my parents, in different ways. A lot of young women, and actually now young men, 2 weeks ago in Spain, a guy I'm thinking about hiring said, I don't think I can do what you do. Like, your wife stays at home with your kids. He said, I know, but I want to be a connected parent. I don't know how you can do it without an infrastructure. Like, I'm not a great parent, but I love being a parent. And I love the family that I have created that has probably been more created around me. But I don't know how you can do it without an infrastructure. So when I try and counsel people, which I try not to do because my family is crazy and not repeatable, okay? I do think there are really great, wonderful career people, okay, who have created an infrastructure. My infrastructure happens to be my wonderful family. Everybody has their own infrastructure. There's a great, I mean, this could not be more pop culture, and I'm embarrassed to admit it, but Vanity Fair this month has this great spread on a woman who got divorced but wanted to stay with 2 kids, and now the woman and her husband and then the ex and his wife are all together. And I'm making no commentary on that morally, but I do think you need an infrastructure. And then here's a second thing I think I have. And these are things you have to create, and this is why being an entrepreneur matters. You have to be able to create financial flexibility. Because when I wake up in the morning, I say, if it all falls to pieces and I decide I don't want to do this, I have the financial flexibility. I walk. Now, I haven't done it yet, and I think a lot about it. But I think when I was younger and I was trying to figure out how am I going to figure all this out, I clearly would never have planned on the blessings that I had. But one, I was, as I'm sure my parents will tell you, was wild. Probably not in the nature that you all are, but I truly was. But I ended up going back to the infrastructure I had, which was my family. I ended up staying in Chicago, then ended up moving closer. I think that was one thing, and that mattered. And the second is the reason, I remember the moment I decided to start Ashton Partners, because I realized, and this is embarrassingly true, I realized how much more money my 2 brothers made than I did. And I did the math of how I could catch up, and I realized I never could in my current job. And so in my head I knew I needed to create a financial flexibility so I could do whatever I wanted. And I think those are the 2 ways you do that. In life, what I think I've come to at 44 is, number one, you work. You have to put so much energy and effort in everything you do. You have to wake up, and even though you screwed up the last 80 times, you have to convince yourself the 81st time it's going to work. And then there's a whole bunch of luck. And so the most successful people work ridiculously hard and then have a bunch of luck. And I had a bunch of luck. But, I think what is kind of cool, it's very difficult being a working mom in a lot of cases, right? Because there's a wonderful study, which is depressing, that McKinsey did, that they presented it to us a couple months ago, on the fallacy that there's a glass ceiling for women. And they interviewed brilliant women over 10 years. And in the end, what they found, and I truly believe this, is that there is no corporate ceiling, corporate imposed ceiling. We impose it on ourselves because as we get to the point where we could be CEO, we say, I don't want to do this anymore. I got enough money. I want to spend time with my kids. I don't need this. The political nature, I don't need any of it. And there's so many different things I could do. And I use that to say what I love is that I think women have been there for about 10 years. What I'm totally digging is that men are getting there. I work with absolutely brilliant men who say, it is 4:30 and I'm going home to coach my kids' t-ball. And the guy I'm telling you about is the guy who brought in what was ultimately a $110 million Lehman deal. And I have 100 stories like that. So, I think you have to create your own infrastructure. You have to get really lucky, and you better figure out a way to be financially flexible, because I don't know how you do it without that. But the other thing is I think you guys are going to enter a working world a little different than I did, where we're kind of used to both men and women saying, I'm not going to travel. I'm not going to do that. This is volleyball season for my son. Like, you got to push that, because I think I'm lucky enough to be surrounded by a bunch of fathers who will go home at 5 o'clock, work till, spend time with their kids till 9, and get back on at 9:30 and start working. The world is so much more flexible. You got to take complete advantage of that because we do want to, I mean, the toughest but the best part of my week is, you know, I was lucky enough yesterday to be home to spend a couple hours with one of my daughters watching her sing. I mean, I think that probably made me happier than anything I've done in 3 months. And because I have the flexibility to do that, and I demand it at every level, nicely you have to demand it, then your life is so much more balanced because you can do that. And I think what this McKinsey study, and it's really worth reading because it's depressing, but I think it's very meaningful. And there was 2 quarters ago in the Atlantic Monthly, there was a discussion specifically on this with women. The discussion really is that employees are demanding work-life balance. And the positive is that we're giving it to them. But the negative is that we never turn off our BlackBerries or iPhones. And so in saying I'm going to go home from 5 to 9 and coach my kids t-ball, I have the responsibility that at 9 o'clock and at 10 o'clock and 11 o'clock and 4 o'clock in the morning, my BlackBerry is next to me and I'm dealing with messages from there. So that's the negative. But it's luck and God, that's for sure. That's for sure. And I'm 44, so the world could fall apart in a year, too. That I've seen and that I'm always ready for. Any other questions? Yeah.
What was the most difficult thing you've tried to recently?
Oh, God. I do this. I think it's right now. This is such a difficult time. I'm at the point in my career where I am like 100% positive when I go to pitch someone something that I'm right and they should do it. And I tend not to participate in sales pitches that I don't feel in my gut is right for the company. And this is such a tough market, and I don't ever remember a market like this. This is such a tough market because you're a CEO. If you stand still, you blame the market, you probably get another year or 2 out of your job. If you do something revolutionary, the risk of it failing because of market conditions is so high that you probably won't do it. And so it is, and I see it with boards too. You know, when I started my business in 93 or 94, if you remember that period, the market was going up. I mean, I was laughing because I met the old CEO of an internet company called Globe.com that none of you know, that like went out IPO at 11 and ended up at like 210. I think went bankrupt after that. But that was a market where everybody felt like we have to take risks now. And all you had to do at any semblance of the world was to tell them the right risks to take. Now it's so frustrating because I think you really have people kind of, you know, I think beaten down. And so I think it's very tough to compel decision making. The other thing that was really hard, and I'll tell like a fast kind of funny story, but a few years before we sold the business, the guy who ultimately, the FTI person who ultimately bought the business, came in, and I was a few months pregnant with the twins, and I'm pretty sure I was a mess. I mean, I don't, like, the guys that work with me now have these wonderful stories of, like, stuff I said, stuff I did. I mean, I had 2 older kids, I was traveling, I wasn't sleeping, I had found out I was pregnant with twins. I mean, this was not part of my plan at all. And this poor guy comes in, and I've known him for years, and he sees and he makes an offer on the fundamental pieces of the business, which was like 1/3 of what I wanted for it. And I remember in my like highly hormonal state saying to my husband, you know what, that would be enough money. I'm so tired. I really, you know, I'm going to do this. And I remember him saying, like, talking me out of it, go back there and fight. You know the business is worth more. Go into the meeting, like, even more pregnant, even more hormonal, fight. And I got to tell you, it was one of the ugliest discussions I've ever had, you know, whatever number of months pregnant, yelling at him that this thing wasn't of value, whatever, and we couldn't get anywhere. And I remember thinking, man, did I misplay that. And really, like, I should have been able to convince this guy to pay more for my business. Man, I misplayed that. And for a year or 2, I thought I really misplayed it. To the point where, because I was highly hormonal, and this is still on record, I sent him a letter outlining of how stupid he was. By the way, the guy's worth like $100 million. He's like Bill Clinton's best friend. But I felt the need to like send him a note about how incredibly stupid he was, which to his credit, he sent a very respectful note back and said, good luck to you. Not one of my finer business moments. And I really sort of walked away like, I've got this business and all these people, and now it's in different cities. And this is horrible. Like, how did I end up here? I can't get rid of this, whatever, it's pregnant. So the story, I think, ends in a good way because there were two ways to handle it. One was like to get really depressed and hide under my bed, which was absolutely what I was doing without my husband, actually my business partner at the time. He was like, I might have offered at that point to sell the business to him for like $1. I mean, the story, you're so hormonal and you're so tired. So the good part of that story is I remember when I got rational, when Ava started sleeping because she never did, at 6 months, I remember like starting to think about, well, I still want that money for the business and I still think it's worth it. And so I started to talk to everybody who I could talk to say what would add value, what would add value. And at that moment, I remember sitting with my partner and saying, we got two choices. We can either go along as we are and maybe we'll get an offer or not, but it's not gonna be the offer we want, or we can take a big risk. And we can expand the business in all these different ways, and we can throw back all of the money that we've taken out of it because we were kind of fat and happy for that age right then. And to his credit, he said yes. So in like 2 years, we opened up 3 offices. We got totally lucky. It was the middle of the technology boom. We were minting money in these offices. I mean, it was just pure, utter luck. And then I went back to the guy, and I said, listen, you're going to want this business now at the valuation. And I am not pregnant, and I'm having no more children, so we can have a rational discussion. And he and I had dinner, and to his credit, he was the most rational man, and like 2 months later, we had a deal. So after that moment, I decided that there's almost nothing that isn't irretrievable, because you could not have screwed up a business negotiation more than I did. It's not possible. When I go back, reading the letter is physically painful, what I said. And I remember like my partner kind of editing it, and he was far more aggressive than me, and even him saying, are you gonna send this? So anyway, so nothing is irrecoverable is my point. Nothing is irretrievable, and major business mistakes probably cost you a lot. In that case, I got lucky and it didn't, but good question. And anybody wants me to negotiate the sale of their business, you'll appreciate that I then hired somebody to negotiate the sale of the business the second time. I said, great, we have a deal. Now here's this guy who was my mentor in the business. He's now going to negotiate with you because I'm clearly incapable of it. So it all worked. Any other questions? I so much appreciate your attention and your questions. Thank you.